This episode of Recovery is Possible is brought to you by Retreat Behavioral Health, where there are endless possibilities for recovery. Retreat provides quality care at their leading mental health and substance use treatment centers, which are designed to offer patients truly personalized and comprehensive programs that are tailored to their needs. Retreat substance use and mental health treatment centers in Palm Beach County, Florida, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and New Haven, Connecticut do everything in their power to ensure that patients receive the highest quality treatment in a safe and comfortable setting. So reach out today at retreatbehaviorhealth.com or call it 855-802-6600 for more information. Again, that's retreatbehaviorhealth.com. Hello, this is Mike Van Meter. Welcome to the Recovery is Possible podcast. I want to thank you for joining me, and you can reach us at our Facebook site, which is also called Recovery is Possible, or our website, which is vanmeterwellnesssolutions.com. Today, we have an old friend of mine, Suzanna Hasnay, and Suzanna was an instructor along with me down at the FBI Academy when I taught a number of courses, but the one that I talk about the most for this program is the one called Leading at Risk Employees, which dealt with substance abuse, alcohol, PTSD, suicide, family violence, all that good stuff. And we talked about that with police executives down at the Academy. But Suzanna was also an instructor along with me, and you're going to get to meet her today and hear about all the great work that she is doing, has done, and the work that she did at the FBI Academy. But I don't want you to panic. It's not just about the FBI Academy. A lot of her principles, in fact, all of her principles have application to all of us in our daily lives. And so with that, Suzanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be here, and thanks for inviting me. And for all of you who are listening or have listened to Mike's wonderful podcast, I want to say this. I'm gonna embarrass him for a little bit here, but he's a tremendously talented instructor, and it was a pleasure to work with him for the several years that we did. I think it was like 5 years or so, Mike, at the FBI Academy, and I think aside from this wonderful work that he's doing, first of all, it's not surprising that he's doing this great work in this podcast, but he's like as honest as they come and is definitely candid, that's for sure. And just a really good human. So I just wanted to say that, Mike, because it's true.
Oh, and wait a minute. I didn't even ask you to say that. Normally I have to ask you to say nice things about me, and I didn't even ask you.
No, not at all. So there's a first for everything, Mike. First for everything. Well, yeah, thank you again. And I am a retired agent, and I retired after about 20 plus years, a little bit over 20 years. And I currently have my own business. It's called Police Spirit, and I can tell you a little bit about that later. But I also work for a company called Eagle Security Group, and they're based out of Fredericksburg, Virginia. And what they do is they contract me back to the FBI Critical Incident Response Group Crisis Management Unit. And there's kind of a history behind that as well, which I'll mention, which is kind of the foundation for what I do today. And my main focus with both my company, Police Spirit, and as an FBI contractor with our Critical Incident Response Group is training in resilience for law enforcement officers. Training in resilience, what I mean by that is growth mindset, mindfulness, and human performance. It's like, how do we not only be better law enforcement officers, but how do we have a fuller, richer life, right? Just overall, we all want to be better human beings, and we're all a work in progress. And we actually have to work at that sometimes. And I primarily work with law enforcement, but not always. I mean, I have worked outside the law enforcement world as well, because as Mike just said, the premise of this conversation and what I do is kind of across the board, you know. And for the FBI specifically, at this point in my life, I work with primarily tactical operators and other mission critical teams across the bureau, such as evidence response teams and bomb techs, crisis negotiators, and the like. And I have to say this is I absolutely love what I do. And I know you can all hear the passion in Mike's voice when he talks about recovery and how he supports the education and the training in this area, and his willingness to kind of put himself out there in the area of recovery and tell you about his story as well, which is really important. And I just want to say I'm really grateful. And I wasn't always grateful. I think when I was younger, you sort of take things for granted. And once I got, to be a little bit older in life, I came to see things a little bit differently. And one thing is that, I spent so much of my life like running away from stress and, kind of quote unquote, dealing with trauma in unhealthy ways because I was trying to run away from them. And I think that's human nature, is that instead of, dare I say, embrace stress and trauma, which are part of the human experience, what we do is we as one of my mentors out in Oregon, Rich Gerling, who I'll talk about in a little bit, says, is we tend to demonize stress and trauma. And we can't. And so I want to tell you a little bit about how I got here and why I do what I do. And I think I should. I debated talking about this because it's a little odd, but I don't. Maybe it's not odd because it gives you a foundation of where I came from and why I'm working in this resilience and mindfulness area now for law enforcement. But I had kind of an unusual law enforcement start. I know Mike was in the military. You were with MPD, right, Mike? So
yeah, Metropolitan Police
Department in DC.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Before he became an FBI agent. Well, I was a professional dancer. All right. So I was a ballet dancer, all through my childhood. And I obviously, to go on the professional side of dancing, I became very serious about it. And then I ended up getting a bachelor's degree in dance. So I remember telling my parents, hey, Ma, I want to go get my degree in dance, every parent's dream, right? I get a degree in dance. And she's like, and my mother was from Austria, from Vienna, from Graz, Austria, actually. And she had this really cute, actually, Austrian accent. And she goes, Susie, like that. She'd call me Susie. And she goes, Susie. She said, okay, go ahead and get your degree in dance. But make sure that you get your master's in something practical. And thank God for that, because at the time I had no idea what she was talking about, getting something practical. But I'm glad I did. And so my mom encouraged me, supported me to be a dancer. And at the ripe old age of 24 years old, after being beaten down, burned out, underweight, borderline anorexic, pretty much a hot mess, I retired at the ripe old age of 24. And I did go on and get my master's, and I sort of threw the dart at the wall, and I thought, what the hell am I going to get my master's in? And so I threw a dart and I went, business. Okay, let's just get a degree in business. And ironically, I was working for the Ohio Ballet. I got my undergrad at University of Akron, Ohio, and I worked for the Ohio Ballet for a while. And the managing director
for the corporation,
for Ohio Ballet. For the Ohio Ballet, the dance company.
Oh, okay.
The dance company.
Oh, wow.
I worked as an intern there. And so the managing director of the Ohio Ballet happened to be a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, right? And she knew I was done dancing and I was going to go, do what my mom said, get something practical. And she said, how about you go to University of Wisconsin-Madison? There's this great profit, primarily arts administration. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, Madison. She said, have you ever been to Madison? I said, no, like that. And she's like, I don't know. She said, it's just this wonderful program, one of the best in the country, blah, blah, blah. So I said, okay. I had an internship with the Ohio Ballet. And the managing director at the time, she was a graduate of University of Wisconsin-Madison. So she said, hey, have you ever thought about going to school in Madison? And I said, no, like not at all, right? Not even at all. And she said, no, this is amazing program in a school of business. It's for arts administration. So you're combining like your arts experience with, with ballet, with business, all that kind of stuff. And I went, okay. So she kind of shamed me into going there. And I'm so glad she did, because I did go to school there. And it was a wonderful experience. One of my favorite cities in the country is Madison, great school. And then, so I did what my parents said. I got my master's, and then I moved to Cleveland. So I told you I went to undergrad in University of Akron. And so I ended up moving back to Cleveland. And a few years later, I ended up becoming the director of, back in the day, they called it corporate wellness. I don't even know if they call it the same. It's a little bit of an old term, but back then they called it corporate wellness. And so I became the director of corporate wellness for British Petroleum, BP America, and then BP Oil. It was a wonderful job. I mean, I loved that job. I mean, I thrived in it because it brought the physicality in it, which I was a dancer. I was kind of an athlete my whole life. I loved to move my whole life. And so it brought the physicality. It brought the physiology piece that I had taken away from my ballet training and my degree. And so I did that. But here's the other side to it. Back when I was around 10-ish years old, I don't remember exactly, but right around 10 years old, I remember telling my mom I wanted to be in the FBI. And of course, she thought I'd lost my mind, right? But it came out of left field. But that was always in my head, even though I didn't really pursue it, all right? So there's a reason I'm telling you that. So I moved to Cleveland after grad school, and eventually, like I said, I worked for British Petroleum. And because I couldn't dance anymore, I wanted to find some other physical outlet, and I always loved to run. So I started running, and so I joined a running group like a lot of people do. And lo and behold, there were a few FBI agents in the group. And I ran races with them, and I trained with a couple of guys, blah, 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 right? So then one time after a race, we were having a little party after the race. And one of the agents said, "Hey, did you ever think about being in the FBI?" And I said, "I got to tell you this story." So I told him about my childhood interests that I had pretty much put in the back of my mind, over a decade before that, right? So he said, "Well, why don't you do it? Let's try it." So long story longer. Anyway, I become a new agent. I get in, and I'm all excited. I mean, I'm a little bit older. I'm in my early 30s at that point, and I get out in the field, and I start at the Washington field office, and I'm all full of piss and vinegar, and I'm excited, and I'm working hard, and I'm trying to fit in because I'm coming from a dance world and like an arts world, and it was a little bit weird at the time because I almost felt embarrassed to say what I did before. Honestly, not almost, I was, because there were so many like lawyers and military guys like Mike and cops, and so I felt who the hell is this ex-ballet dancer in here? So that was kind of in my mind a lot early on in my career. But I was doing all right. I was holding my own, and then the stress started to build. As I got older and experienced more life, and then was in this new world of law enforcement. So the stress started to build, and I was exposed to bad things, exposed to that there is evil in the world, right? And for my whole life, I always thought that being physical was enough for me to weather any storm. And what I mean by that is weather any stress, process my stress and pressure and any kind of trauma in my life. That if I could just go run it out or lift it out or row it out or whatever, I'll be fine. And for my young life, it was, frankly, it was enough. Until it wasn't, And by the time I was 36, I had gotten married to a wonderful man who's also a retired agent. And we both got transferred to the Seattle office, and we in our careers and both really into our work and doing our thing and hardcore, trying to do the best we could. And it was a great life for a while. And we went hiking up in Seattle. It's beautiful. We went hiking, cross country skiing, and snowshoeing and all that kind of wonderful stuff. And it was a great life. I'm like, wow, how could I be this fortunate, right? And then we ended up transferring to the Critical Incident Response Group, which ironically is where I work now, in the Crisis Management Unit. And we started to experience some difficulties. I mean, we were deployed a lot, and we were deployed to different places a lot. We were apart a lot, and that, as everybody knows, that takes its toll. And then we suffered some losses with pregnancies, and we had an especially difficult one with a baby with Down syndrome, and late in my pregnancy. And so that was in around 2006. And then we decided to transfer to another field office, and that was Cleveland. We went back to Cleveland, which is where I had a tight circle of friends left over from back in the day when I worked for BP. And we moved together, obviously, to Cleveland. And our difficulties in our marriage and the grief that we both felt was really starting to build. And the interesting thing about grief, Mike, and stress and trauma is that if you're always used to putting on a game face and you're always like positive and like I was kind of perky. I'm kind of like I'm a kind of a jokester, and I really do feel I try to be, and you have a really positive outlook on life, and I love to have fun. As Mike knows me, I really enjoy human connection. I love being
That's
around
how I've
people,
always
and
known you. Just very upbeat and positive.
I really love life, and so there is a problem with that. Only a problem with that is when it becomes fake, when it becomes a way to numb what's happening to you and not wanting anybody else to see it, because, and even as a dancer, you take so many hits in terms of, this is when I started to become proud that I was a dancer, is when I started to see that discipline or that dance really made me, frankly, take a beating. I was always told I wasn't good enough. I wasn't thin enough. I wasn't pretty enough. I wasn't talented enough, and all that kind of stuff. So you always take a beat down. And so you either succumb to that or you really build on your resilience and you really kind of charge through, and it really changes your mindset, because it's like, damn it, I am good enough. I am talented. I'm going to keep going forward. But when I really started facing real struggle in my life, and that positivity and my resilience started taking a beating, and I was so confident in myself that I could get through any storm, that I didn't know what to do when I was starting to lose control, and so I started to feel ambivalent about my profession. I'm like, all this time and all these years thinking about the FBI since I was a kid, and then finally getting in, never even thinking I would, I started becoming ambivalent about what I was doing in my profession. I didn't have the passion for it. I was like, what the hell am I doing this for? Meaning I didn't have any real purpose, that I thought anyway. I felt like a bit of a failure, because my personal life was falling apart and my professional life, I felt, was falling apart. I wasn't who I was anymore. So, I started to numb my pain, right? I numbed it with, the usual suspects. Yes. Booze, men, and then I even was using the thing I really love is exercise, because anything in excess, to numb, even something that's good like exercise, is dysfunctional. And so although I wasn't an addict in any of those areas, it wasn't healthy. And obviously it wasn't healthy. And I started to pull away from the people I loved. And my husband was one of those people. And so essentially my professional and my personal lives were collapsing at the same time. And so perky, positive, fun-loving Suzanna was like, okay, what in the hell am I going to do now? So I tried to numb my emotions. And as you know, Mike, and as anybody who's listening to your program, who's going through recovery, when you try to numb your pain and your sadness and your depression or whatever it is, what else do you numb? Love, joy, gratitude, appreciation, all of that gets numbed at the same time, right? Because neurobiologically, that's just how we work, right? You can't separate it out. So I knew that I didn't want to be that way anymore. That much I knew. I didn't really like myself a lot. I had no compassion for myself. And in fact, one of the things that we talk about a lot now with our tactical operators in our training, which I'll explain in a little bit, is we talk about self-compassion, that's really about acceptance of yourself, right, for who you are, in order to move forward, in order to really be accountable for your actions. You have to be compassionate about yourself, so you can do something about things you're not happy with, But I kept charging forward with my work, and I fortunately had this tremendous group of friends that really supported me, and one really good girlfriend of mine who lives in Buffalo. She's a counselor, right? And I remember one time her coming to visit me and in Cleveland, and she said something's wrong. She knew something was wrong. She could see it. She could feel it. So it's people like that in our lives that when we push them away because we're embarrassed or fearful that they won't love us anymore because we're struggling, those are the ones that are going to be your rocks, your rocks. So with that support and with counseling, I did go get some help, get some counseling. And I want to say this, and I want to digress for a little bit for your listeners, that when you go to a counselor, sometimes you pick one and that one is like, oh God, what an ass. Like, you don't even want to, it's like, you don't click, you don't connect. So fear not, just keep trying, because you're going to find one that clicks with you, So some people get a bad taste because they have some counselor that doesn't work for them. And I want to say that they're out there for you. So I happened to, after several tries, I think 3 or 4, I found somebody that was really helpful for me. And so I had good counseling. I had great supportive friends, and a couple really fortunate events in work. Some work colleagues that really teach. You love to teach, you should do it. So I ended up applying for a job at the National Academy, where Mike just talked about, where Mike worked. And as I look back to that particular time when I got that job at the National Academy, that was in 2009. My husband and I were already separated. We were going through a really difficult time. And so I was still reeling. I was still trying to, from 2006 to 2009, it was basically a hot mess for me. And I realized that coming to the National Academy and being an instructor was the first step for me to come back to myself, and to be able to move forward with my life. And I distinctly remember this. My very first National Academy session was session 239. And I taught a class called Leadership, Ethics, and Decision Making when I first got there. And there was I believe he was a lieutenant. I don't remember exactly, but I believe he was a lieutenant. I had this little office, and Michael will remember this. It was literally an old, I think, broom closet or something.
I was going to say it looked like a closet.
It was disaster. I had a desk, a wooden desk from, like, I think 1959, and then I had a bookshelf, and I had a filing cabinet behind me, and a nice kind of comfy chair that I think I stole from a conference room. I had it in my office for a student or a colleague to sit and chat. Right. So here comes this student of mine. He knocks on my door frame. He goes, "Hey, Suzanne, you got a minute?" This is about 6 weeks into the 10-week academy, National Academy. I go, "Yeah, come on in." My very first session, he sits down in the chair, and I say, "What's up?" And he says, "I don't know if I want to do this anymore." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I don't know if I want to be a cop anymore." And in my mind, I'm like, "What?" And then he went on to kind of tell a story about some of the things he was going through at the time. And, that particular student was really suffering, and he was really struggling with a lot of things. He was struggling with his identity being wrapped up in being a police officer. He was struggling with a difficult home life. He was struggling with the loss of passion and purpose. He couldn't remember why he became a cop in the first place, and I felt like, I feel the same way. I felt the exact same way as that student did. And here's something that I guess it's interesting, but disturbing, but not surprising, is that after that session, and that was in the fall of 2009, I taught many, many more sessions after that. And not occasional sessions, but every single session I taught for National Academy, there was a student just like him that would sit and say, "I don't want to do this anymore." And so for me, it struck a light bulb. A light bulb turned on in my head that there's something happening here. There's something happening here in policing where, most all of us got into the profession of law enforcement because either we had a higher calling, we had a purpose, we wanted to give back, whatever it was. But it was definitely something we chose. That, we're very lucky that most of us in law enforcement profession really love our jobs, despite the difficulties that come with it. But every single session, there were students, and these are command staff level people that were higher up in their organization, saying, "I don't want to do this anymore." The stress and trauma had taken their toll so much that they forgot the joy in their life. They forgot the joy that their profession gives and gave them. And they were so focused in on what their body and mind and spirit had taken such the toll that this profession had on them was, in their mind at the time, insurmountable. So I started to look at that from a viewpoint that we have to start talking about this in our leadership classes, because these are leaders that are struggling, right? So I ended up teaching a course called Enlightened Leadership. And I also taught a course, a spirituality course for law enforcement that was started by the legendary Sam Feemster, who actually started this course back in the day. And after he retired, I ended up doing one of the blocks of the courses about a year or two after he retired. And I started to talk about, from a leadership standpoint, I started talking about love and joy and compassion for yourself, because if you don't have it for yourself, eventually you ain't going to have it for other people either. It's stress and trauma are insidious, and they can really eat away. Stress and trauma can really eat away at our soul. And I ended up in 2015 making a cold call to one of my really, really good friends now. He was a lieutenant. His name was Rich Gerling, who I mentioned earlier. And he is a pioneer in mindfulness for law enforcement, resilience-based training, and in primarily mindfulness for law enforcement. And he is a lieutenant out in Hillsborough PD in Oregon. And so we just had this amazingly wonderful conversation, never met him. And I invited him to the National Academy. That was in 2015. And he did a block, first ever block at National Academy on mindfulness and resilience. And he has since become my teacher, my mentor. And I went through a peer coach training for law enforcement with him just a couple of years ago. So after the National Academy, so I kept on with this course of study and course of teaching. And I took a real, this is what I want to do after I retire. I was getting pretty close to retirement. I had about 3 years left. And so after National Academy, I went back to the critical incident response group. Okay, so this is a decade after I'd first been there. And I was very lucky to have this awesome unit chief. His name was Mike Hartnett. I want to give him a shout out too. One of my favorite ever in the Bureau. And he was real supportive of the stuff, I was talking about with resilience and spirituality and mindfulness. And it was very applicable to critical incident response, right? So about 2 to 3 weeks before I retired, my boss, Mike Hartnett, calls me into his office and he goes, "Hey, we'd like to offer you a full-time contract to work with Crisis Management Unit." And this would be doing more command and control and command post operations. And I just said no, because I was moving on with my life. I said no. And he goes, "We thought you'd say that." I'm kind of paraphrasing, trying to remember what he said, but he said, "We thought you'd say that." He said, "How about part-time?" And I went, "You know what? No, I need to move on from the FBI. I need to kind of new chapter, et cetera, et cetera." He goes, "That stuff you talk about with resilience and mindfulness and spirituality," he goes, "and all that stuff." He goes, "How about if part of what you do here involves that?" And I said, "Deal, I'll do it." So that's how I came back to the FBI. And now I'm very, very fortunate to be able in my retirement to be able to work with primarily our mission critical teams and actually go out and train with a small group of some current and some retired agents. And Rich Gerling comes out with us as well in a program called PEAK. And the whole program is geared for kind of pre-incident, pre-habilitative kind of readiness for a critical incident. But it also translates into post-critical incident as well, because it's all a conversation about the science behind the training is all about a conversation about the science behind resilience, the science behind mindfulness specifically for law enforcement. Mindfulness work is, there's no way I could put it, is that it's kind of built for law enforcement. And mindfulness gets a kind of commercially kind of tone to it, which kind of is kind of a little bit upsetting or a little annoying to me, because mindfulness is really straightforward. Mindfulness is about being in the present moment. And so if you think about it, if you're under stress and trauma and you're not in the present moment when you're numbing yourself with booze or sex or drugs or bad behavior or being a general asshole, if you're numbing yourself with regrettable behavior, that's not being present. Being in the present moment actually makes you more accountable for your actions, because you're paying attention to what you're doing. You're paying attention to what's happening to you so you can do something about it. You can make a decision about your life because you're present for it, because you're sitting, as my friend Rich Gerling says, which I love how he says this. He says you're sitting with your own suffering. You're embracing. Frankly, he puts it this way. I think I don't want to misquote him, but he says you're embracing your own bullshit. You're kind of sitting with it and you're dealing with it. You're not running away from it, for lack of a better word. So I'm really, really fortunate to be able to do that kind of training now. And we've worked with myself and the team of guys that I work with who all have either neuroscience background, physiology, or had some kind of leadership role in the military. We go down the road and we literally sit with our tactical operators and we'll talk about mindfulness and we'll talk about joy and we'll talk about vulnerability and shame and grief and all. And we try to tailor make it for each team. And we do the same thing for our evidence response teams. And we've actually worked with did some training for some leadership teams out in the field. And I personally have done some work with some local police departments, and I've spoken at police conferences. Before COVID, I was on the road quite a bit, speaking at police conferences about this area of training and education. And I do believe that, if you're talking about recovery, like recovery and resilience, they go hand in hand, right?
They do. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think they almost mean the same. And one thing I want to say about resilience, and maybe, and I hope you can kind of clarify this for the listeners. I don't think I'm going to get this out right, but when we think of resilience, it's not about bouncing back. And that really gets my goat. That's a real pet peeve of mine because, first of all, humans are dynamic and humans are constantly changing, and trauma and cumulative stress changes you. It changes your neurobiology. It changes you. It changes. We're dynamic. I'm trying to get this out right. We're dynamic individuals. Humans never, ever, ever stay the same. So once a crisis hits, you don't bounce back to what you were before. You're not a rubber band that goes right back to where you were before. Resilience is about adapting to that adversity. Basically, again, embracing. Nobody wants to embrace it, so it sounds kind of counterintuitive. But that post-traumatic growth that we've heard in the last couple of years, that term, which is a wonderful term, it expresses it exactly what resilience is: post-traumatic growth, being better. Dare I say, being better for the stress and trauma that you've been through.
Yeah, there are so many, and I know that the courses that you and I taught were really intertwined at the Academy. I taught leading at-risk employees, and you did a lot with wellness and resiliency and all of that, because it goes hand in hand. And really, at the end of the day, when you get into recovery, when you get into like 12-step meetings and recovery meetings, there's a misconception out there that recovery meetings get you to stop drinking. That's not true at all. You stop drinking by going through detox and withdrawing and weaning your way down, and then you finally get to the point where you stop drinking or drugging, whatever your issue is. What a 12-step program does is it trains you to not start drinking and drugging, and that's a difference. So how do the two combine? Well, when you talk about resiliency, what happens in recovery, like in my life, I had to develop, I call it recovery. I call it 12-step program. You might call it resiliency, but in a lot of ways, it's the same concept, because what happens, and this has happened, I'm at 9 years now in recovery. And in those 9 years, I've probably had worse things happen to me in recovery than I ever had prior to recovery. Deaths. I've experienced suicides. I've experienced losses of jobs, retirement. All those big changes in your life, those stressful changes in your life, all the other difficulties and traumas. But yet I've not found the need to pick up a drink. Well, how is that? Well, that's because I've developed, in my world, the recovery program, but in your world, the resiliency program. I've learned to be more resilient about the issues that were going on, and then realizing that taking a drink, a drug, or you mentioned sex or gambling, food, there's all kinds of different things that people can resort to that will not, whatever the situation I have, will not be improved by picking up a drink. That will not help the situation. You might feel good temporarily, but it certainly does not work out for you in the long run. So let's talk about that a little bit more here, but I just did want to throw in a word from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by FHE Health. FHE Health has been providing life-changing behavioral health services for more than 20 years. They treat substance abuse and mental health disorders in an individualized and comprehensive approach. Recognizing the specialized treatment needs of the first responder community, they've created Shatterproof, a dedicated program for law enforcement, fire rescue, and similar communities to receive treatment among peers. They're experienced in providing privacy and working with unions for employment. FHE Health is committed to providing the best care experience for our patients, for their families, and for our community. Learn more at fhehealth.com. That's at fhehealth.com. Now, Suzanna, maybe elaborate on that a little bit more, because I agree with you. Recovery in my world is about being in the present, not catastrophizing the future, meaning worrying about things that have not happened yet, and then not worrying about things that have already happened and you can't do anything about. Right? Because what we find is the majority of things that we worry about in the future that we think are going to happen never actually happen. And the problem is that I heard it said once, and this is going to be kind of crude, but this is the way that I heard it said. If I have one foot in yesterday and another foot in tomorrow, I'm pissing all over today. And I don't really live in today. And I like that. True. But maybe talk about that. And I loved how our classes sort of were interwoven at the academy. You know, it was you and I used to joke about that all the time. You try to prevent the problem, and then I deal with them after the problem.
Right, exactly.
So your class tried to prevent them from coming to me. When you came to me, you've already got the problem, but they go together.
Yes, exactly. Well, I think a couple things with that is, I guess I kind of look at it this way is, I guess, and recovery maybe is the same thing. I think is part of the issue with recovery is control. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we try to control things that we can't, and I think that's very much human nature. And when we get caught up in a struggle to control, whether it's controlling how someone else feels about us, how somebody treats us, we get so caught up, we get so spun up in focusing on what we can control. What we fail to do is look at what we can control in our lives. And what we can control in our lives is what's happening to us right now and how we respond to our life, how we respond to stress and trauma, how we respond to those things that come at us in life. And do I go for a bottle of wine? Do I go for indiscriminate sex? Do I go for whatever behavior that ultimately down the line is not healthy for us? Or do I focus on what's happening to me right now and accepting the fact that I'm struggling? And I think especially in law enforcement, to be able to and not try to judge yourself and say, what I am, or why do I feel this bad? Why do I feel this bad? All these other guys seem to be handling all this stuff really well. Why am I the big failure in all this stuff? We're trying to control things that we cannot control. And so what we can control is how we respond to that stuff that's going to happen to us instead of run away from it, sit with it. And I tell you, we're a work in progress, and we're never finished until the day we die, I think. And
Progress rather than perfection. Yep.
Yes, progress rather than perfection. Everybody struggles. Everybody suffers. And I think, and I'm just going to say this, and I believe, having taught in this profession now for a decade, is that we in policing and law enforcement, we're really good storytellers, as we know, right? And everybody has a story. And it's very powerful, and it's courageous, and it's brave to come forward and tell your story. And it's important to tell those stories. But, and I may add a but to that, but if we only tell stories about our struggle, there's going to be a now what factor. What do I do with all that? And that's the part where I am hoping, I think we are going in that direction of like, what do I do with all this now? What do I do with all that I'm feeling right now? And the more we continue to tell these stories about what happened in our lives, like at police conferences, there's always somebody that comes up and is super brave and tells a really inspiring story about the struggles that he or she's been through and where they are now. I found that sometimes we listen to stories and we tend to compare our stories to their stories. And so what I'm trying to say is we listen to other law enforcement officer stories. And so what do? We say, well, my God, that's really bad. He really went through a lot. Mine wasn't so bad. So why do I feel this bad? Why do I feel this low? What is wrong with me that I feel this awful about what happened in my life, about this experience I'm having? To me, Mike, is not helpful.
No, we call it comparing out. We call it comparing out. I'm not like in an AA meeting. I say, "Well, I'm not as bad as that guy," or they're worse than me, and it's irrelevant because it's that's their story. Helpful. It's their We're all in different places and we're all affected in different ways. We're both here. We're both here for the same reason. And what brought us here is largely how you got here is irrelevant to me. I am here.
So exactly. So much of the work that I'm fortunate enough to be a part of is really working with your own struggles, working with your own stress, working with your own trauma, and really becoming, I would say, being comfortable sitting with that discomfort, being comfortable experiencing that hurt and experiencing that really awful feeling that we are very good at running away from through booze and sex and all those other things that we talked about earlier. So I'm not sure if I answered your question. I probably didn't, but I wanted to make sure I mentioned that.
No. That's very good stuff. And I really think that I would like to think that you and I had a really big impact on the law enforcement community, because I know when I came into law enforcement, and that predates my experience with the FBI back as a police officer, these types of issues were never talked about. Never talked about. And by the way, to a large extent, it's not even just law enforcement. I want to make it very clear that this discussion that we are having isn't even in the community, really, when you think about it. Because let's be honest, you don't have to be a SWAT operator or a police officer or a military member to go through what we're talking about. Everybody goes through stress. Everybody has trauma. There's other professions where people experience trauma as well. Or maybe you, just through circumstances, maybe you had some family crisis, a death in the family, or you were just part of a traumatic event, or an accident. We all go through trauma. So the principles that we're talking about apply to everybody. They really do. And this is an important discussion for everybody to have, because you have to build resilience. I tell people in the recovery world that you have to build your program. Again, in my world, it's the recovery program, or if you want to call it the resiliency program. The term doesn't really matter. The fact is that you've got to train for that day, right? What do they always say? You don't have to get ready if you stay ready. If you don't have to get ready if you stay ready. And the true test, the day that you have that crisis, is not the day that you want to say to yourself, "Oh, I need to have a resiliency program." And I'll tell you, Suzanna, the case in point with me was when I was about 6 years into recovery, and I think you remember this. I think we were still working together at the time. I was in a pretty bad cycling accident where I ended up in the hospital for 4 days. And the problem with that is I had to have surgery and they had to medicate me. Well, I'm in recovery, so this is a real issue, right? But I'd had about 6 years preparing for that day that was going to happen, and I'm glad to say that I got through that successfully. I took the medication that I needed to take for surgery and for the pain management afterwards, and then was able to get off of it because I'd built up the resilience. I built up my team. I had a team of people that were around me to work with it. And that's another point too, is that we get well and we stay well by working with other people. This is not something that you do alone. And I was successful, but I'm glad that I did that, because I had I knew that in my life there was going to be something that was going to happen, and I had to have that plan in place before that day happened. And I think that's a lot of what you talk about as well.
Yes, 100%. And when we go out and talk to our mission critical teams, and when we start talking about mindfulness and being in the present moment, we practice meditation, and we have a yoga program that we offer. And I never would have thought, I never ever would have thought, even 5 years ago, that I would be doing this for the FBI so much as with our mission critical folks, out in the field. So it's amazing how far we've come. And frankly, it's about time, because we know all this stuff is based in science. Everything that you talk about, Mike, with recovery, everything that I talk about in resilience, that everything is based in science. This is not about that, that term touchy-feely, when you talk about compassion and love and joy and gratitude and mindfulness, all that touchy-feely. I cannot stand that expression, because it downgrades the power of what resilience really is. It downgrades the power of what these skills can really help you with. So, and really make you a better, stronger, richer human. And it allows you to have a better life, whether you're a law enforcement officer, no matter what profession that you have. Stress and trauma are part of the human experience. And so is love, and so is joy, and so is fun, and so is happiness. And everybody deserves that. Everybody deserves that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like you mentioned, it is affecting everybody. And it is not, I've heard that over the years, and I think that's why particularly military and law enforcement people, it's hard to reach, because it has that perception as being touchy-feely. It is not that at all. Yes. Every single thing that you were talking about is based in science. And, people, I think, left to their own devices are figure that out. They figure out that the concepts that we're talking about, having a plan, developing your spiritual life, taking care of yourself, diet, exercise, vitamins, minerals, getting enough sunlight, all of that contributes to that feeling of wellness and resiliency. And this is not touchy-feely stuff. It's out there. Ironically, I was talking to a gentleman last week who just got out of prison in Scotland, and he's a recovering drug addict. And we were talking, and he was telling me about all this stuff. And he says, "Hey, mate, let me tell you, I figured this out and that out." And he's basically going through the same principles that you and I were talking about, and it was through his deep self-reflection while he was in prison, and he came to the same conclusions that you and I came to. But what I said to him was, well, a lot of the stuff is out there. You can read it, and that's what I think a lot of people don't understand, is that you don't have to figure this out on your own. This work that we are talking about, resiliency, recovery, wellness, taking care of yourself, diet, exercise, there is a lot of literature that's out there on this. And these are tried, true, proven. And whether it's Suzanna, myself, or someone in your agency or your organization or in your community, reach out and get the help that you need, because it is out there, and you can get well. You can get well, but you have to want to get well. That's the key. There's nothing I can do for you if you are not willing to get well. And that oftentimes is the case, is that people just don't want to put their hand out to, and sometimes that's the hardest for people to do, particularly in our profession, is ask for help. It's very hard to do.
Well, absolutely it is. And I think, I do want to say this too, kind of segueing off what you just said, but just because just because we're having conversations about resilience, and I'm talking especially in law enforcement circles, but talking about resilience and recovery, and talking about mindfulness and compassion and yoga and all these kind of things that we never would have thought would have existed in our conversations in law enforcement 5 years ago. It doesn't mean that that's the be all end all, that's going to cure you. I mean, there's so many other pieces that go with an overall sense of well-being, from making sure you go to the doctor and getting checked out, getting your baseline checked out, like you said, reiterating what you said, the spiritual part of you, whatever that is. And it's different for everybody. It could, for some people it's religion. It's not for me, but it is religion for some people. For other people like myself, a spiritual, event would be going for a hike on Mount Rainier, in the Pacific Northwest, something like that. It's something only what spirituality is for you, but it's a really powerful intervention tool, and going to a counselor or, or having your tribe, your support network of people who care about you. And I know that I was not really good at asking for help, if you want to say, or asking for support from my friends, because I didn't want to burden anybody. You know what I mean? So I could deal with it by myself. But I also want to say this with that is that just because you're working towards something to be a better, fuller human being doesn't mean you're not going to have slip ups once in a while.
Oh, no.
And it doesn't, and it's like, I look at this and, like we were saying earlier, we're a work in progress, right? And, I still can't get it right. But I always ask myself, what is right anyway? Only yourself knows what is right for you and what you need to do, not what society or the culture tells you you should be. And to me, it comes down to being a good human. I read some article, I think it was like in Forbes or something like that. And they had this name for making mistakes, and they called it an FHB, a fallible human being. And I always like that term, because we're working toward being a good human being, but you're going to be fallible, and you're going to have fits and starts in life, and being okay with that, and being okay to struggle once in a while. Suffering is a part of life, right? This was a while ago. I saw an interview with Stephen Colbert, and I believe it was his father and his sister. In fact, a few family members died in a plane crash. And I'm going to paraphrase what he said, but it stuck with me. He said, life is a gift, and with that gift comes suffering. That it's part of your life. And so how you respond to that will determine who you'll be on the other side, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with that. And we're not going to get away from that. It's how do we deal with it and stay in the present?
How do we respond to it? How do we work with it? How do we stay present? How do we work with it in order to be better on the other side? And that's that post-traumatic growth right there.
Wow. Well, fascinating conversation, Suzanna, and I really appreciate you joining us today. I really do.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Out. Yeah. Well, guys,
I miss seeing you. I
do too.
Academy.
I really, and so with this in COVID, a lot of times I'll do. I want to do interviews in person, but unfortunately with COVID, we're on the phone, so we're using the technology to talk to one another. But it's always great to talk with you.
Yeah, great to talk with you too, Mike.
And by the way, so for the listeners, if they want to get a hold of you and they want to get more information or contact you and have a conversation with you, how would they do that?
You can. I'll give you my email. It's I'll spell it for you. It's Suzanna Hasnay, and it's S like Sierra, U Z like Zulu, A N November N A. So Suzanna Hasnay, H like hotel, A S Sierra, N November A Y. Suzanna Hasnay at policespirit.com.
Oh, outstanding. And guys, as always, I'd like to say I don't represent any group in particular. I do talk about groups, but I don't represent them. Just keep that in mind. I just talk about what works for me or I've seen works for others, and the same is true with Suzanna. So I don't represent anyone other than myself. My only purpose is, and Suzanna's purpose, is in giving this information is to share with you what we've done because it's helped us and maybe it can help you too. So if we've said anything that doesn't apply to you or you don't agree with, then just discard it, but try to take some information that you can use for yourself or maybe to help others as well. So that's what we do in recovery. We help ourselves along the way, and we try to impart that knowledge to others as well. So with that, please visit our Facebook page, which is Recovery is Possible, and our website, which is VanMeterWellnessSolutions.com. Let me know how I'm doing. Let me know if there's a topic that you're interested in hearing. I'd love to hear from you. And hey guys, we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. This episode of Recovery is Possible is brought to you by Retreat Behavioral Health, where there are endless possibilities for recovery. Retreat provides quality care at their leading mental health and substance use treatment centers, which are designed to offer patients truly personalized and comprehensive programs that are tailored to their needs. Retreat substance use and mental health treatment centers in Palm Beach County, Florida, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and New Haven, Connecticut do everything in their power to ensure that patients receive the highest quality treatment in a safe and comfortable setting. So reach out today at retreatbehaviorhealth.com or call it 855-802-6600 for more information. Again, that's retreatbehaviorhealth.com.